Hi folks, this is Brian, and this video is an introduction to your knot tying session. There'll be a series of videos to follow, each with an individual knot and instructions on how to tie that. I just want to talk to you about rope and different types of rope, different materials that you will commonly find: nylon, polypropylene, and natural fibers such as manila are commonly found. Doing fisheries work, we're often working in wet or damp environments, and that's not typically good for natural fiber ropes. They're susceptible to damp rot or mildew. So that leaves us with nylon or polypropylene. Those two are both susceptible to UV rot from sunlight, so we have to be cautious about that. The difference between the two: nylon has the better abrasion resistance, but polypropylene rope floats, and for the work we're doing, that's often desirable, and so we typically stick with polypropylene rope. You can't tell the difference by looking at it, at least I can't. So when you buy it at the store, that's when you look for the material, nylon or polypropylene. The diameter is something also to take into consideration when you're at the store. You can just you can buy a rope already packaged, or you can buy it off of large spools and get them to cut it to whatever length you want, whether it's Canadian Tire, hardware stores, some sporting goods stores. But you have to choose your diameter of your rope also. 3/8 inch rope, most of these you're looking at here are 3/8 of an inch. You can see in relation to my hand how big that is. 3/8 of an inch is fairly nice to work with. If you go beyond 3/8 of an inch, half an inch or larger, really nice to work with, because it's going to be nice big rope in your hand, but often the knots won't bind tightly. If you get below 3/8 of an inch, getting into 1/4 inch or smaller, you get some great knot tying capabilities, but those ropes will often cut into your hand. If you had one like this under an intense load and you were pulling a heavy weight, then that would cut into your hand. And also, if you're pulling a heavy weight or heavy load on a smaller rope, the knots might bind and be tougher to get undone. This one, typically I used to pull my bow up into my stand because I know it has great knot tying capability. It's not going to, the knot is not going to release, and the bow doesn't weigh a lot. The weave of the rope, you can get a braid or a twist, and the braids come in a number of versions. If you're looking at a braided rope that doesn't have a core, these are not great ropes for us, because if you see how that will collapse and I can squish it flat, what's going to happen is when I tie a knot with that rope, it's going to bind very tightly, the knot is, and we'll probably not be able to get it undone without a knife. Every rope has its purpose. This one is for water skiing. It's nice and light and strong, and it pops up off the water easily. The idea in that application is that you are not typically tying and untying knots. It's just got one purpose. It's pre-tied and ready to go. Rope like this one, you can see there's a little bit of a squish. It does have a core, but it's got a soft braid around that core. You can see my motion there. These aren't bad, but the preference is one that typically does not give at all when you squish it. If it's firm and solid, that's a great rope for tying knots with, for working with, for getting those knots undone again. When you're working with knots around water, there's a lot of potential danger, and if that danger should arise, it's great to be able to cut ropes quickly, and you should have a knife that you can access with one hand and open with one hand. And I like a serrated blade. If there's rope under tension and you have a sharp serrated blade on that rope, it'll cut it quickly and free up whatever the problem is. When you buy rope, or if you cut rope, it's usually not necessary to cut rope, but if you do, use some sort of heat sealing method. You can do this with a Bic lighter. It often turns black and goopy at the end, or if you get it done at the store, they'll have a nice clean heat sealing knife that'll seal that for you. And you get a nice end to your rope, as opposed to If you don't seal the ends of your rope, you get fray going on, and the fray tends to always pick up burrs and pieces of vegetation and all sorts of different things. You can also seal the end of a rope by lashing it with a smaller line, or for temporary fixes, just tie an overhand knot or a figure-8 knot in the end of the rope, and you've got a temporary fix until you fix the problem later. So, to move on, before we start tying knots, you'll need to know 3 terms that I'll use when I'm talking about the rope and tying the knots. And you may have a great long length of rope like this, but typically when you're tying your knot, you don't need that. You're working with the end. So the rest of it can just sit back behind you, and this is what you're going to be working with. The short end that you're working with is called the bitter end. If we wrap it around a tree or some object, such as this, the short end is the bitter end, everything else is the standing part. The bitter end I'll often refer to in my instructions as the working end. Both terms are acceptable. Now if you're having the need to tie a knot and you're nowhere near the end of your rope, you can just create an end by folding your rope like that. And then you just work with the doubled portion of rope and tie your knot. The term for that is a bight, B-I-G-H-T. So the 3 parts of the rope we're going to be talking about when you're tying your knots: you've got the working end or the bitter end, you've got the bight, and you've got the standing part of the rope.